Hi, everyone. Ross Porter with you. Our guest today is a former USC football captain who has been a college football analyst for Fox Sports since 2004. He's also a very popular sports talk show host in Los Angeles, and it is always fun to chat with Petros Papadakis. How you doing, P?
I'm great, Ross. How are you? It's great to see you and talk to you. It's a thrill. Thanks for having me.
Well, great. Little background, folks, on Petro for our website members. Petro was a tailback on the University of Southern California football team in 1997 and 1998. He missed 1999 with a broken foot. He had several surgeries and finished his career in 2000. His teammates honored him as most inspirational player. Well, Papadakis scored 16 touchdowns for USC, 8 as a junior, 8 as a senior. He was named the team captain, but he has referenced that in one sentence over the years. What was the thing you've always said about that?
I used to say I was the captain of the worst football team in USC history, but that might have changed this last year.
And you said we finished last in the conference, right?
Yeah, we were the only one to be last in the conference. It was a three-way tie at the bottom, and we had lost to, I think, both of the teams that we were tied with. So we were, you understand how those things break down. That's the punter. That's the punter, by the way. That's not me. That's a punter from the Pete Carroll era who they put my number on.
We're just giving you credit for being able to get across and get in there. So we don't. Hey,
it's a one fake punt Pete Carroll ran. I didn't play for him. Our jerseys look different.
Petro's father and older brother also played football at USC. His grandfather was on the Trojan basketball team, so that family goes way back. You graduated with a bachelor's degree in English language. Now, what were you going to do with that?
Not much. I was not a good student in high school, Ross, and really one of the only reasons I went to a four-year college right out of high school on full scholarship, no less. And I signed with Berkeley before I left for USC. My major at Cal was going to be rhetoric.
And you didn't last at Berkeley very long, did you?
No, I was a mess, but it wasn't because of the school. I liked it very much there. I just wasn't mature enough to handle it. And I came home, and I really didn't utilize my education much in high school. The only thing I felt capable of doing was English, because I'd always been a reader. So that was kind of my saving grace. Thank goodness. So some of the reading I'd already done, by the time I got to college, and it really was a thrill to be in the English department at USC. But it was a very rare thing for an athlete to have an English and American lit major. I even took a bunch of Russian literature classes when I was at SC. I mean, I don't speak Russian, but yeah, that part of college, I really I got a lot out of that, and I enjoyed it.
Would you agree with me that your popularity with the media in Los Angeles began when you were a player, and you were always candid when interviewed?
Yeah, that really, it wasn't because of my performance on the field. My performance on the field was an excuse to talk to me, I guess would have been a good way to put it. I think, back when I was playing football in the late 90s, 2000 was my last year. The newspaper was much more relevant. Writers were more relevant. The people that were with the team as beat writers, from the LA Times to Riverside, San Diego, we had guys from all over following us, and they weren't website fan site guys. They weren't, celebratory necessarily. We weren't very good, and I liked writers, I appreciated that about them. Yeah. So it was kind of an interesting relationship. I had no idea that it would cultivate itself into a career in the media the way it did. Really did not occur to me the whole time I was in college.
You said one time, I just feel like the media is starved for somebody to say something different than, well, we really have to play hard this week.
Yeah, I said a lot of things as a young player. But yeah, they were, I mean, we had a rough time in those days. We didn't win every game, which is what USC was used to. And two coaches were fired while I was at SC. So when that's the case, sometimes somebody who's doing something a little bit different is a breath of fresh air. I was very fortunate, in that time to just kind of be around at that time and to be quotable and just kind of fall backwards into this career.
Now, you started, I think, with John Robinson, who's in the College Football Hall of Fame, and then later Paul Hackett.
Yeah, and then my last coach was Hackett, and that was his last year and my last year, and he was fired. And then Pete Carroll took over in 2001, went 6-6, and then in 2002 they won the Orange Bowl. 2003 won the Rose Bowl. 2004 they won the championship. So it went on from there.
I think they beat Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl.
That's 50, right. Yeah,
55-19. And I just wanted to make sure you knew my friend.
I was there. You know what? I think the way things played out for Oklahoma, I think is pretty good. Obviously it was rough to see Lincoln Riley take a different job. I think it's still interesting that he took.
I want to talk to you about that in a few minutes, but you've been an analyst on many college football games, most of them in the Pac-10 and then the Pac-12 beginning in 2011. And checking back, that conference has only had 3 national championship teams in 48 years. USC in 1974, Washington in 1991, and USC in 2004. Why?
Well, I think that football is valued differently. I think the TV deal really hurt the Pac-12, in this modern era where you want to get a team into the playoff and stay relevant as long as possible and compete. 2 things have really hurt the Pac-12 in the last 12 years, let's say. One is the TV deal they did, not partnering with, a Fox or an NBC or an ESPN. They tried to make their own TV network, and they didn't have the distribution or really the quality of product. Some good people worked there, but it just wasn't good enough. And that hurt them. And even if they still had that going and it wasn't good, USC being relevant like they were in that year you mentioned, that Orange Bowl championship game with Matt Leinart and Lendale White, and I was with that team for 2 weeks in a hotel before that game. It was like a jailbreak when the game was over, just to get out of Hollywood, Florida. But when USC was relevant in that way, whether they're winning the title or not, where you're relevant and playing for the title, that means when USC plays Stanford, when they play Washington, when they play Washington State, the eyes of the country are on the conference. Yeah. And like it or not, that's just the way it is. USC moves.
Is that what you call West Coast bias?
Yeah, East Coast bias. I think, you look at it with the Heisman too, Ross. Who's won the Heisman on the West Coast that didn't play for USC? You can count them on, I think, what, Mariota, which is because of Nike, right? He was great, but Gary Beeman,
OJ.
But he was at SC. Outside of, if you're not at USC, it's really hard to win the Heisman.
Right. That's right.
As a West Coast guy, and Beeman and Plunkett, they probably got it because they played well against USC. So USC brings a spotlight to the West Coast. So USC being those 2 things, USC being down for the last 12 years. Yeah. Kiffin, Sark, Helton, all this dysfunction, and the TV deal. That's why we haven't competed on the West Coast in the last decade plus. But there's a new TV deal coming, and USC's got a legit coach. So we'll see how quickly it turns. You saw with UCLA basketball, it's a sleeping giant. They make the Final Four. Everybody loves it again. The infrastructure of the city gets behind the place because everybody's waiting for them to be relevant. It's the same with USC, and the West Coast goes with it.
I was curious about this, and last night I looked it up. Of the last 16 national champs in college football, 15 have been Southern schools, including the last 7. The only exception was Ohio State in 2014. Why, in your opinion, have the SEC and to a smaller extent the ACC teams dominated college football?
Oh, there's a few reasons. One is, when they get in the championship games, they win the games. It's one thing to get there, but you got to win that game. And when Ohio State did it, it blew everybody away. It was that kid Cardale Jones. He just came out of nowhere, and he never really played well ever again. But it's interesting. I think it's just like anything. There's a myriad reasons, but one, I think they have more of a dedication to the sport. On the West Coast during COVID, when a lot of people weren't willing to play, they were willing to play. They played a whole season. The Mountain West was more willing to play than the Pac-12 during the COVID year, and it showed. They had a much better year last year than the Pac-12, right or wrong. So they have more of a dedication to football. They have a dedication to the fronts, defensive and offensive line, and they seem to cultivate that better. USC is one of the only schools that can combat that. But they haven't been dedicated to that.
You got to figure Nick Saban in there too, don't you?
Oh yeah, but they are able to do things that West Coast schools won't be willing to do, like medical red shirts. If you miss on a recruit, they'll find something wrong with him and say, your neck's screwed up, and doctor signs off, and they get that scholarship back. That guy can finish school, or usually just transfer somebody. They run people off a lot easier. Let's just put it like that. If you try to do something like that at USC, LA Times would tell that people would be on it. That's one of they're just more willing to do things under the guise of higher education to make the football team successful. And but that's not to say that things aren't cyclical and it might not change. But they've also kind of doctored their seasons. They make it so every single team in the SEC, good or bad almost, really has an opportunity to go to a bowl game. One less conference game. And I don't really mind any of the stuff they do. The one thing that the SEC does that has always really bothered me, that is when in other conferences, you're grinding out bloodbath conference games, against Purdue or Nebraska or Iowa State or Washington State or Cal, when you're doing that in November, getting ready, and then you're going to play your rival, UCLA or somebody, the SEC teams take a break. They play McNeese, they play the Citadel, they play Georgia Southern, they all take a week off. And to replenish themselves and, watch plays be successul. And, there's a formula there, and I'm not sure it doesn't help them going forward into the playoffs, and they have a great relationship with ESPN. Some would say it's not helpful for the rest of the sport. I would agree with that. I think it's really, really unhealthy. And I think the ratings reflect that in these championship games because they've become a regional event. But I think those are that amalgamation of reasons.
I want you to be honest with me. Will you be honest with me?
Yeah.
Do you agree that 44 bowls are too many?
I'm not really. I don't care. If there's money to be made and the kids want to play, like there's always kids that want to, it's not the bowl game that is really what's important for these teams. Maybe the rules need to be changed in this regard, Ross, but teams that really getting to a bowl game is a difference between the haves and have-nots in college football, because you get an extra 15 practices when you get the bowl game. And that means you get an extra spring, you get extra time to develop your players. And so many of these programs are developmental programs, and that's really critical. So if you don't make a bowl game 3 or 4 years in a row, you've missed 3 or 4 years, 50, 60 practices where players could have been getting better. So it's whether you get to the bowl game and perform well or not, it's the cultivation of your young players that's important for these programs. Now, once they hit the field, some of the games are great and inspirational. I loved the Army Missouri Bowl game this year. I thought was a great game, out of nowhere. I liked watching Air Force.
How about Rutgers at 5-7?
Did they deserve that? I don't know. They were ready to play. Thank God for cell phones. In the 80s, you wouldn't be able to find the guys.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember going to Mexico one year after we lost to UCLA. I came back, I learned they fired John Robinson.
Really?
I didn't pick up a newspaper. I was I was still 19 years old.
You didn't have your laptop with you either, did you?
No, it was a different time. So, I think that's what's important about a bowl game. Whether the game is good or not, people watch them, they sell advertising. And if the guys opt out that are going to go and play somewhere else or whatever, and they want to move on, there's always a young guy that's ready to play, and it's his opportunity to look forward to the next year. That's Christian McCaffrey had a great bowl game as a freshman after not playing a whole bunch his first year in like the Red Box Bowl or something, So that kind of stuff, I think, I don't think there's too many. We disagree.
All right. Let's look at your alma mater, USC, and its football history. The school played its first game in 1888. Before they were named the Trojans in 1912,
the Methodists.
USC athletic teams were called the Methodists.
Let's go Methodists.
Occasionally, the Fighting Methodists. Oh, I love it. The University of Southern California has won 11 national football titles, 70% of their games, 64% of their bowl games, and had the most players drafted in the NFL over the years, 510. Yet, as I mentioned, Petro, they've captured just 3 national championships in the last 48 years. And I think you talked about that a little bit more.
Well, they really had to hit rock bottom with their administration, and they really had to hit the lowest of lows with their attendance and all kinds of things for somebody to write a check and hire a coach that was, a legitimate guy that's a proven head coach at the college level. They hired Lane Kiffin, who had not, the maturity to deal with it, and he imploded. They hired Sarkisian. Those were both Pete Carroll disciples. Then they ended up with Helton and just bad leadership between Lynn Swann and Pat Hayden. And I mean, we can go through all the bullet points of all the bad things that have happened there over the years. And they're going to try to erase that through the celebration of hiring Lincoln Riley. We'll see how that works out. But somebody wrote the $90 million check to hire Lincoln Riley, his defensive coordinator, whatever coaches he wanted, however that happened, whatever kind of parallel move he was making. I would expect a guy that age, if he's going to take another job, he's in Norman, where they do a great job with football and football culture, and you don't have to rebuild or repair anything.
Yeah.
Of course, they're going to the SEC. But like we said, they have their own formulas for success there. And I think Oklahoma can follow that formula and be just as successful as, say, Florida or any of these other SEC teams, So
were you surprised when Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma?
Absolutely. No one saw that coming. I don't think Lincoln Riley saw that coming. I think he was talking to somebody else, and
LSU, I think.
yeah, and whatever happened in that, feet were being dragged, and there was a late night call to USC, and USC got one of the most fortunate windfalls maybe in modern college football history. We'll see how it works out. But somebody had to pay for it. And somebody had to say, yes, we'll give control of the football program to this guy. My thing is, if Lincoln Riley has success at USC, he'll be just
keep him. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he'll be just every other coach, Ross, who's had success at USC goes to the NFL.
That's
John
right.
McKay,
That's
to
right.
the Buccaneers, John Robinson to the LA Rams, Pete Carroll to the Seahawks, Lincoln Riley to the Cowboys, right? I mean, it's or the Rams or some, who knows, but that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, because keeping him is not going to be easy if he does what I think he's going to do, which is win 10, 11 games at USC every year.
Yeah, well, I want to brag a little bit more before I get back to the real serious part of this interview. Since 1945, Oklahoma has the most wins of any college team, the record for consecutive victories, 47, and the greatest winning percentage of any school. Having said that, the Sooners are 0-4 in the college playoffs, primarily because Riley had a much below average defense, 101st in the country 2 years ago. Now, my question for you, Petro, is this. With basically the same defensive coaches he had at Oklahoma coming to LA, will Riley do better at USC because the Pac-12 will not be as dangerous offensively as the Big 12 was?
I'm not sure, but I do expect him to have more success. I know that defensive coach, Alex Grinch, and I really like him. I met him when he was at Washington State under Leach. And, that's a challenge to play defense.
And he went to Ohio State, didn't he?
Yeah, then he started to go to the cathedrals of college football, Ohio State and Norman. But, that's not an easy offense to call a defense around. And I thought it was interesting. If there's something about having a play caller as your head coach, and he's an offensive play caller.
Yeah.
And, there's just something about that in the world of football where you give up points, so you hope that your defense is like Oklahoma State's, opportunistic,
very good.
Cause turnovers, wreak havoc. Now there's going to be a different level of athlete on defense at USC. I think they can do some things out west and get people and not have to really stretch to recruit big defensive line people.
And he's a great recruiter.
Yeah, but they've got to really pay attention to the fronts. There's one equalizer to the South in college football, and that's always been USC's ability to cultivate offensive line on the West Coast better than anybody else. Stanford had a little run there, but when they lost that coach and he went to Rice, the head coach at Rice, a lot of their physicality went with him. But I mean, you look at the guys like Don Mosbar, Anthony Munoz, Bruce Matthews,
Ron Erie.
Yeah, they're West Coast guys cultivated on the West Coast who played on the West Coast. Lincoln's got to recapture that. And if he recaptures that on the offensive line, it's hard to believe that the defensive line wouldn't go with it. You know what I mean? And we'll see. But you're right. Offensive play callers, they have a tendency. We see it with McVay and the Rams at the next level. Yeah. They have a tendency to get a little cute, and it'll cost you a game. Yeah. As many games as it'll win you, it'll cost you a game too. I think Oklahoma fans know that.
Yeah, and what does that matter really if the Trojan defense can't stop the Southern teams in the playoffs?
Well, that's the problem. Even when Washington under Chris Peterson, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Even when Washington got to the playoff a few years back, their defense was pretty good, but they just could not push them off, and the Southern teams off the line of scrimmage. They couldn't move them, and that's where we're deficient, I think, on the West Coast. All the quarterbacks come from here. All our quarterbacks come from Southern California. I mean, if you look, or the state. I mean, think about Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen. These two guys could be playing in the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. Those are JC reject quarterbacks from California. JC guys.
Yeah.
And then the starting quarterback at Clemson, DJ Uiagalelei, St. John Bosco, Bryce Young at Alabama, modern day, CJ Stroud at Ohio State, Etiwanda or Rancho Cucamonga area. Yeah. I mean, we can go on and on and on. Most of the West Coast football innovations have come from the West Coast in the last 30 years. So we're not deficient out here. We're not dying out here, but there's a few things that we can do better. USC being back on top, and a new Pac-12 TV deal going along with that could help.
Well, since we have a number of UCLA fans on this website, let's talk about the Bruins. Were you surprised Coach Chip Kelly got a 4-year extension?
No. We knew that there was kind of a standoff going on. I mean, whenever there's an AD who's a really energetic and an AD who's making a name for himself like UCLA's and Martin Jarman, he's ultimately going to want to bring in his own head coaches at the revenue sports level, especially. I'm sure they would, when Mick Cronin takes the Laker job or something, who knows? Maybe he'll be there 20 years. I hope. I love Mick Cronin. But, Martin would relish the opportunity to hire his own basketball coach. I'm sure the football thing's the same, but Chip has a lot of support from Casey Wasserman, who's a big money guy, and Troy Aikman, who has a lot of yank, obviously. And, it was about his defensive coordinator and whether or not Chip was willing to move on from a guy who's a very close personal colleague and friend, Jerry Azanaro, and they have moved on from him. So, it looks like, and, Chip, I don't think Chip or Justin Wilcox were very interested in the Oregon job.
No.
Because Oregon, there's too many cooks in the kitchen now, I think, and it's not a recognizable place for guys that were there still in the kind of infrastructure of Rich Brooks, not even Mike Bellotti. So onward and upward for UCLA. They've improved every year. Chip stripped it down to the bolts, and they've improved every year that he's been there, and I expect him to compete. I like his model.
All right, and let's give him credit. After 3 losing seasons, they went 8-4 this year. So that's a nice improvement for them. UCLA has fielded college football teams for 94 seasons. How many national champions have they had?
One. Red Sanders.
What year? 1954.
54.
17 conference titles. They've won 10 games in 9 different years for their best records. Petro, are you surprised UCLA has not done better in football?
No. They just recently made a big investment when they hired Chip Kelly. That was their swing for the fences. That was somebody doing what they've done at USC, writing a check and giving somebody the keys. I think that's why the first couple of years were so disappointing to UCLA fans. They'd expected more to be shot out of a rocket, and they weren't. But, UCLA, even in my time when I was being recruited, they were kind of more about, look at all these sports that we have, and the 100 championships.
Right.
And that's great, and the school of Jackie Robinson, I mean, it's a great place. But, with college football at that level, you have a tendency to, those guys want to be treated special because they're a big revenue sport and there's 85 scholarships. Yeah. So if you kind of lump them in with the men's volleyball team, and that's kind of your culture over decades, and the John Wooden shadow from the men's basketball, I think it made it a little, in town, if you go play USC football as a big recruit, you're on top of the food chain, even if the basketball team wins, but UCLA, I think they've just recently really invested, given football its own building, and kind of onward from there.
And for those who weren't old enough to remember this, John Wooden won 7 consecutive national championships and 10 in 12 years. Nobody will ever equal that.
No, ever. He cast a huge shadow over the coaching world.
Our guest today is the outspoken Petros Papadakis, who has been voted the best sports talk show host in Los Angeles by his peers. And he's been doing it, and this surprises me, for 15 years on KLAC 570 with the talented Matt Money Smith. You guys seem to be friends.
Yeah, well, the kind of show we do, you have to be pretty friendly, because, radio used to be so much more, in my day, growing up listening to Jim Healy and you, Russ, radio was so much more about information. It helped to have a good voice and a memorable delivery, like you, but people didn't know what was happening unless they tuned into the radio. I mean, I'm not sure what year they stopped doing an evening newspaper, but that was where you went, and the radio hosts, they had to have an encyclopedic knowledge of what was happening and what was past. They had to be ready to answer any question. And when I started to do radio, it was the inception of podcasts, cell phones, and now all that information, there's no breaking news. All of it is on everybody's phone. You get some sports guys, they want to interpret the news for you and tell you what it means. And we do some of that. But, really being entertaining, I think, is so much more valuable for that role now.
That's right. And you do song of the day, and
all kinds of stupid. I humiliate myself every day. I'm 44 now, and I started doing daily radio in LA in my 20s. And people still expect me, I dress like it, to act like I'm in my 20s, and since then I've become married, I've had kids, I've bought a house, or all kinds of things that people do as they grow up.
I felt very old last night, Petro, when I noticed you were 44.
Yeah.
and you were born in 1977, which was my first year with the Dodgers.
I know it, man. When I'm doing games now, guys that I played with, kids are on the roster of the teams, and it's wild, it's wild to start to experience that, because when I started doing college football and there was guys that I played with that were still on the field playing, guys that I'd played against, that were still on the field, guys that I'd been close with, Carson Palmer, guys like that. Yeah. And now it's their kids. So I guess the world keeps turning, Ross.
I know. I just noticed that in your early years, Carson Palmer was way down the list. I think he completed 3 passes that one year.
He had some ups and downs.
Yeah. You once described yourself as a walking contradiction, the only person in the world who can sit on a fence and watch myself go by.
I stole that from a class that I had been in that day, some literature class, but I felt like it was, that was the great part about being an English major. You could just go right to the newspaper and, make them sound like you were really brilliant. God, I forget what I stole that from. I forget the name of that author, but I did kind of feel like that as a college football player. I really felt, I felt very much part of something. I was the captain of the team. God, I'm pretty fat in that picture. I was the captain of the team, but and I related really well with everybody. But I also felt, even my last year of high school football, like I was kind of watching someone else. I always felt like it was kind of surreal, and every once in a while I felt like we were kind of being silly, putting ourselves in plastic outfits and running into each other.
Is is that you with your dad?
No, that's a guy named John Falaktu. I'm the one that looks old in the picture. I'm the bigger guy.
I see.
I'm super overweight in a polo there, and the other guy's named John Falaktu,
All
a
right.
local Greek.
Okay, let's let's get to some more current hot topics in sports. Are you in favor of expanding the college football playoffs from 4 teams?
Yeah, I think that they need to involve. Well, first of all, the college football playoff is not an NCAA entity. That's not the trophy they give away. It's a created entity by basically ESPN, and ESPN has a vested interest, obviously, in the SEC as the operator of the SEC network. So, they need to involve more people.
How many more? How many more?
6, or no, 18 playoffs, so 4 more teams,
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
I prefer 4 teams myself, but I can see why you could go to 8.
I mean, to me, the most watched show in the history of but this was BCS, but this modern era of figuring out 1 versus 2 in some kind of way is Auburn versus Oregon. That was the most watched game. Cam Newton versus and it wasn't like Mariota was playing at Oregon. It was a guy named Darren Thomas was the quarterback. So why? You've been to Auburn, Alabama.
Yeah.
It's a pile of bricks. Nobody's there. You've been to Eugene, Oregon. There's nobody there. It's not like 2 big cities or anything. So why was that the most watched game? Because that's the one that involved the most of the country. Mm-hmm. It was a true East versus West. And we got to find a way to get back to that.
Don't you think people are getting tired of having Alabama playing the championship game every year?
Yeah. Well, I don't mind if they play in it, but I'd like to see them play somebody outside the SEC.
Yeah, that's right.
But, credit to those teams. They have a formula and they know how to do it. But I'd like to see more people involved. It can only help.
What do you think of the transfer portal rule, which finds college football players allowed to change schools? And boy, a lot of us happen to do it.
Well, I find it interesting because, coaches have always been able to move around and, take a different job and leave in the middle of the night. And it's not like the players are then sent to Siberia to die. They're still there. And, there's going to be a new coach. In Oklahoma, they ended up with somebody, who's a defensive guy that a lot of people have been getting after for a long time. Yeah. So a lot of people feel like, with Venables, they're very fortunate there. So, I think it's tricky, if the COVID thing made it very, very murky because everybody got an extra year. To me, I don't care where these guys go. I don't care how they do it. If you have the courage, which I didn't, I freaked out and couldn't even handle being at Cal, as a young guy. But if you have the courage to pick up stakes and pack up your stuff and take it from Wyoming to Utah State or whatever, then hey, more power to you. For me, what's most important is that these guys graduate school.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of them are able to do that.
What I noticed is the fact that so many of them have already played 3 years at the one school and they've only got 1 year left and they say, see you later.
Yeah. They graduate and then they go. And, to me, that's okay. There's always somebody else that'll come play, and football teams are formed and cultivated. You bring the guys in, and if they're there in camp, let's play. Let's like to make the team. But so I'm not really as offended by it, I think, as a lot of others are. But to me, it's just important that these guys graduate, have a degree, and then sometimes if you go play at another school, you can end up with a master's degree. Just from playing football, in 12 games or something, at a different school, and they'll pay for graduate school.
Yeah.
And that's always been my point talking to players is, you're going to get used. It's a tough sport and wrecks your body, use them back, get something out of it.
Well, you lead me into my next question. Should college football players be paid or rewarded financially in some other way?
I think so. I think men's basketball too, because like when I played, there was millions of dollars being made, but I felt like the scholarship was pretty ample. And I mean, that was just me, and, people were being paid illegally in all kinds of ways anyway. But the truth is the schools, not some place down the street that sells cheeseburgers, the school that's making the billions of dollars, billions now.
That's right.
Should find a way to pay these guys. But the progressive stuff from the 70s with Title IX is really going to mess with the school trying to pay football and men's basketball. And how do you pay these guys? To me, you give them $10,000 a semester in a bank, and then when they graduate, because they're living under you, and when you graduate, here's $200,000 to start your life, instead of just being, spit out of the program like you feel when you're done playing.
But can you give them $50 so they can take their girlfriend to the movie?
Well, they do that,
Do they?
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they have a stipend. It just really depends. $1,500 a month goes a lot longer in Manhattan, Kansas than it does in Seattle, Washington, or Miami, Florida, as opposed to Starkville, Mississippi. So, it's a complex issue, and, Title IX really mucks it up.
Yeah, right.
But to me, and, that was done under, a different time and with good intentions. But, the intentions now, because there's billions of dollars being made, is to try to get these guys paid that are generating so much money as players in men's basketball and college football. And it's complicated, but I do think they should be compensated.
Our good friend Petros Papadakis is with us, and now we're going to turn to baseball. Do the Dodgers need to find a couple of quality starting pitchers to go with Walker Buehler and Julio Urias?
I don't know. I mean, this is your area of expertise, but
but you're on the Dodger station, so
I mean, people expect them to compete, right? And they expect this guy to outsmart everybody. Their GM, Andrew Friedman, and if he doesn't do it, the fans who have bathed in a lot of success year in and year out, they got the World Series in Texas, of course, but the Dodgers have been really competitive every year, ever since I can remember when they came on the station. I think they've only missed the playoffs once in that whole time since they came to 570. So, I expect them to get some guys and run them out there and see what happens. But as far as I do expect that the team will look a lot different than it has in the last 4 or 5 years, that it's going to be maybe a little bit of a shock to people. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, remains to be seen.
Forbes magazine says it cost a family of 4 $550 to attend a Dodger home game last season, the most extravagant price in baseball. But the Dodgers attracted 2,800,000 fans, 500,000 more than the runner-up Atlanta Braves. So why will it change?
Well, I mean, they make a lot of money. They make a lot of money. They pay the players a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to enjoy games there, but it's still the most affordable, probably best product sports-wise, maybe on the West Coast, maybe even bigger than that.
Even with an average ticket now of $100 and parking $30.
Yeah, I mean, everybody else has priced everybody else out. But you're right. It's not going to get any cheaper.
No.
Because it's an attraction.
Yeah. Another sport. Who do
I
you
do
like?
have to, Ross, the show starts at 1 today.
All right. Who do you
So
like? Who do you like to win the NBA?
I'd like to see Chris Paul get it. After seeing him with the Clippers for all those years, I'd like to see Chris Paul get it going and win it with Phoenix after getting so close last year. But as a Greek American, I love Giannis Antetokounmpo from Milwaukee, the Bucks, because of his Greek heritage, and I love the way he plays.
All right, a couple more minutes, we're through. In 1970, your father, John Papadakis, was a standout linebacker on the USC team that changed football in the South. It was the first time a fully integrated college team had played in Alabama, which had only white players. Coaches John McKay of USC and Paul Bear Bryant of Alabama were very close friends. At the last minute, highly rated USC was added to the Alabama schedule to open the season in Birmingham, purposefully as a statement against segregation. The Crimson Tide had lost 5 games the year before, and Bryant knew he had to have integrated teams. USC that year had an African-American running back, Sam Cunningham, whose nickname was Bam. And that night, he ran for 135 yards on only 12 carries, scored 2 touchdowns, and the Trojans romped to a 42-21 victory. Bryant thanked McKay. The next year, an integrated Alabama team came to Los Angeles, defeated USC 17-10, and had an undefeated season. Now let's fast forward 50 years. Alabama has won 6 national championships in the last 12 years, and including 3 of the past 6. How about your dad? Has a lot of stories about that night in Birmingham.
Yeah, well, we lost Sam this year, this last fall. We lost Sam Cunningham, and he was really close with my dad. So they were very close friends. So, they were around each other a lot. Sam was around the family a lot. So, I'd heard about the game and, how they got the book written and all of that. But really, our relationship went so much beyond that. We watched football together. We spent holidays together, so that was just a big part of our past, and our history, was just being around Sam. They had a black quarterback too. The USC team did, and just hearing about, how that game was played in Birmingham and how they were seen as kind of conquerors. I think the thing that really kind of shocks people the most about that story is that, Alabama didn't, it was 1970 and they didn't have black players, which is on the varsity team, which is an amazing thing.
I think they had one freshman.
Right. Yeah.
He couldn't play varsity.
Right. So it's an amazing thing to think about when you look at the SEC today.
One more story to tell for the pleasure of our one-time USC football captain, Petros Papadakis. In 1925 and 1926, a youngster played tackle on the Trojans named Marion Morrison. He later changed his name to John Wayne when he became a famous actor. And in 1972, as a publicity stunt, the Atlanta Falcons drafted John Wayne. He did not sign. The Duke was 64 years old.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they drafted him. I did not know that. His boat used to be in San Pedro, and they had it at the Maritime Museum, and we used to go over and look at the Duke's boat. And at USC they had his bust there at Heritage Hall, right around the Heisman trophies and all that stuff. So we used to stretch out and sit around, and the Duke would look down on us, So he's part of the history there.
Yeah. Petro, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have.
did. I love seeing you.
Yeah, you were very, very good with all of your answers. I knew you would be. That's why I wanted to have you on. You're very honest.
Thank you, Roz.
And I want to plug this. Your show is what, 3 to 7?
Yeah, 3 to 7 most days, but we move around a little bit because
Right.
to get the
It's
commercials in.
ALAC AM
AM 570, yeah.
570. And I hope you, your wife, and your two children, how old are your kids now?
9 and 6.
Oh, wow. I hope you're all healthy. And thank you, my friend, for doing this. Let's talk along the way.
Love you, brother. Thank you, Ross.
Petros Papadakis. Hope you enjoyed it.